In our headlines on this Monday, April 13th, here in South Korea, the U.S. is set to start a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, stopping ships from entering or exiting Iranian ports, as well as intercepting vessels that have paid transit tolls to Iran. And Iran, for its part, vows not to surrender to U.S. threats and finds fault with the American delegation for the failure to seal a peace deal in Pakistan this past weekend. Meanwhile, President Cheongnamdae hosts Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk at the Blue House today for talks to bolster strategic partnership in defense and high-tech industries. U.S. President Donald Trump ordered the U.S. Navy to block the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. Central Command says its forces will restrict all vessels entering and exiting Iranian ports starting Monday morning U.S. time. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young has the latest.
U.S. forces will begin blockading maritime traffic in and out of Iranian ports from Monday, after negotiations between Washington and Tehran broke down in Islamabad. In a post on X on Sunday, the U.S. Central Command announced the measure, saying the blockade will be enforced impartially against vessels of all nations entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas, including all Iranian ports on the Arabian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. CENTCOM, however, clarified its forces would not impede freedom of navigation for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports. The maritime measure follows the failed 21-hour talks in Pakistan between U.S. and Iranian delegations. U.S. President Donald Trump said Iran refused to give up on its nuclear weapons ambition and declared the U.S. would soon begin the blockade. He added he had instructed the Navy to intercept vessels paying passage fees to Iran, and that the U.S. would begin destroying mines laid by Iran along the strait. Experts say the failure of the first round was perhaps expected, but should not lead to escalation.
Neither side may have wanted to give the impression that they came to an agreement too quickly. They could be opening themselves up for criticism at home that they may have given in too much or too easily. So in and of itself, that is not necessarily the problem. But if on substance they remain this far away from each other and there is escalation simultaneously, that certainly doesn't bode well.
Trump told Fox News Sunday Morning Features that Iran hasn't left the bargaining table, and he predicts Tehran will come back to give the U.S. everything it wants. He later told reporters at Joint Base Andrews that he doesn't care and is fine if Iran doesn't return to negotiations. The Wall Street Journal reported the same day that Trump and his advisors are considering limited military strikes in Iran, in addition to the U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, as a way to break a stalemate in peace talks. Although the White House declined to discuss specific options, officials told the Journal that hours after the Islamabad talks collapsed, the president considered resuming a full-fledged bombing campaign, though less likely, or a more temporary blockade. He also reportedly remains open to a diplomatic solution. In the meantime, Oman has called for an extension to the 2-week ceasefire set last Tuesday to allow more time for the U.S. and Iran to continue dialogue. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Iran, meanwhile, has vowed not to surrender to U.S. threats and laid the blame on the American delegation for the failure to seal a peace deal in Pakistan this past weekend. Our Jong-un has more.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Washington and Tehran were just inches away from reaching a deal during the peace talks. Writing on social media following the collapse of negotiations in Islamabad, Araghchi said Iran engaged with the U.S. in good faith to end the war during intensive talks at the highest level in 47 years. He added that Tehran had been met with maximalism and shifting goalposts, and that a sudden shift in the U.S. position ultimately derailed the negotiations and prevented a memorandum of understanding between the two sides. Iran's parliamentary speaker and chief negotiator Bagher Ghalibaf told state media that the U.S. delegation at Saturday's marathon talks in Islamabad ultimately failed to gain the trust of the Iranian delegation in this round of negotiations, adding that Iran would not bow to any threats. Ghalibaf also said Iran had put forward constructive proposals that moved discussions forward despite deep mistrust between the two sides and dismissed threats from U.S. President Donald Trump. Earlier, Trump ordered a U.S. naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz in response to what he described as Iran's unyielding refusal to give up its nuclear ambitions. Iran's Revolutionary Guard warned that military vessels approaching the Strait of Hormuz would be considered a violation of ceasefire, while the country's deputy parliament speaker said the strait is completely under Iran's control. The Iranian parliament also emphasized that the strategic route is non-negotiable under any circumstances. Jong-un, Arirang News.
South Korea, for its part, is maintaining its emergency economic response system in light of the prolonged unrest in the Middle East. Now, this is according to Blue House spokesperson Chun Eun-soo this past Sunday, after a related meeting presided over by Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy Kim Yong-bom. Officials acknowledged the uncertainty hovering over the local economy and agreed it would take significant time for energy supplies to return to normal from the Middle East to Asia and beyond. President Jae-myung and his Polish counterpart Donald Tusk sat down for talks at the Blue House on this Monday, during which they agreed to advance their ties to those of a comprehensive strategic partnership. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yu-jin covers their remarks and more.
Wearing a tie in the colors of Poland's national flag, President Lee Jae-myung welcomed Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk to the Blue House on Monday for their first summit. Yi and Tusk agreed to upgrade South Korea and Poland's strategic partnership to a comprehensive strategic partnership. As expected, defense ties were at the center of the talks.
양국의 호혜적 방산 협력은 더욱 확대될 것입니다. 저는 양국 간의 방산 협력이 심화 발전할 수 있도록 이미 체결한 총괄 계약의 안정적 이행이 필요하다고 말씀드렸습니다.
Defense cooperation remains the key driving force of our bilateral relations. We will continue with this cooperation while also accelerating technology transfer, localization, and the relocation of production facilities to Poland.
The remarks refer to a defense framework agreement worth more than $44 billion signed in 2022, South Korea's largest overseas arms deal to date. Since then, Korean defense firms have signed follow-up contracts to supply equipment such as K-2 tanks and K-9 self-propelled howitzers. Beyond defense, the two sides are set to expand cooperation in energy, infrastructure, and high-tech industries. President Lee particularly called for Poland's support in helping Korean battery firms enter the country's energy storage system market. Prime Minister Tusk, noting that South Korea is Asia's largest investor in Poland, said he would continue efforts to ensure a favorable business environment. Also discussed was coping with the fallout from the war in the Middle East.
또한 양국 모두 중동 전쟁이 불러온 위기에 대처하기 위해 글로벌 공급망의 안정화가 중요하다는 점에 공감하였고 이를 위해 필요한 협력을 이어나가기로 뜻을 모았습니다.
We must work together toward a new geopolitical balance and peace, and I believe Poland and the Republic of Korea should join forces in this effort.
The summit wrapped up with an official lunch featuring a blend of Korean and Polish cuisine.
The Polish Prime Minister's visit comes less than 2 weeks after President Lee hosted the leaders of France and Indonesia at the Blue House. The visit marks another in a series of recent summits as global uncertainties persist. Song Yu-jin, Arirang News.
Across the border, North Korea's Kim Jong-un has highlighted the task of promoting ties with China as his regime's top priority. Remarks to this end were made during talks with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. According to the regime state media, the talks took place on Friday, the final day of Wang Yi's two-day visit to Pyongyang. North Korea is also set to support China's policy for a multipolar world, keeping in mind the importance of advancing ties to safeguard common interests. The Chinese diplomat, for his part, claimed Beijing-Pyongyang ties have entered a new phase of development following last year's summit between Kim and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Hungary's centre-right Tisza party has emerged victorious in an election that ends Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's 16 years in office in a setback for his allies at the White House and over at the Kremlin. Our Peon Jin covers the election results and their broader implications.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, the country's conservative icon, has lost power after 16 years in office, after the opposition Tisza party won Hungary's general election. Orbán conceded defeat less than 3 hours after polls closed on Sunday, calling the result painful, in a race marked by intense campaigning and unusually high voter engagement.
Dear friends, the election result is not final yet, but it is understandable and clear. The election result is painful for us, but clear. The responsibility and possibility of governing was not given to us. I've congratulated the winner. I thank you for all the great work.
His defeat handed Tisza's Péter Magyar, a former Orbán ally who broke away from the ruling Fidesz party in 2024.
In the history of democratic Hungary, never before have so many people voted, and never before has a single party been given such a strong mandate as Tisza.
Turnout reached a record 77.8%, significantly higher than in previous elections, signaling strong public demand for change. The outcome was a stunning blow for Orbán, a close ally of both U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance had made a visit to Hungary just days before the election to back Orbán's re-election bid. This marks the end of Orbán's long-standing push to shape Hungary into what he called a neoliberal democracy, a model that often put Budapest at odds with its Western allies. Over the years, his government has clashed repeatedly with the European Union over rule of law issues, while maintaining closer ties with Moscow. European leaders are watching closely for a potential reset in relations with Brussels, while the shift could also influence support for Ukraine, an issue where Orbán had frequently broken ranks with EU partners. With Magyar now set to take power, attention turns to how quickly his government will move to realign Hungary's foreign policy and restore ties with key allies in Europe and the United States. Arirang News.
The South Korean parliament is concluding its 3-day interpellation today, with the final session focused on social matters, including education. Our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
The National Assembly convened on Monday afternoon for the final day of its 3-day interpellation session, with lawmakers turning their focus to education, society and cultural affairs. Prime Minister Kim Min-seok joined key cabinet members, including the Ministers of Justice, Interior and Education, for a wide-ranging round of questioning that touched on several sensitive issues. Political tensions ran high as lawmakers clashed over a series of controversies ahead of the June 3rd local elections. At the heart of the controversy were allegations of prosecutorial misconduct and the previous decision not to indict a mayoral candidate in Busan over alleged illicit payments. Lawmakers pressed ministers on concerns about fairness and potential political bias in investigations, to which they pledged to tighten standards.
Going forward, we'll make sure this doesn't happen again by handling things more fairly and thoroughly, especially in election-related cases, under stricter standards.
But the session wasn't solely consumed by political disputes. Lawmakers also turned their attention to issues closer to home for many South Koreans, such as education policy. Education Minister Choi Kyu-jin said a restricted phone for students designed for learning use could be a meaningful way to address excessive smartphone use among younger children, but several factors such as broad social consensus would be needed before moving forward. He also highlighted plans to promote reading from an early age.
We plan to designate pilot institutions focused on reading, strengthen teachers' capabilities in reading education, and expand programs linked with libraries to help foster a reading culture from early childhood.
With both sides using the session to sharpen their positions, the day's proceedings carried added weight, not only as a check on government policy, but as a signal of where the political battle lines will be drawn ahead. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And in other news now, BTS's 5th album Arirang remains at the top of the Billboard 200 for a 3rd week in a row. This is the first time for any K-pop act to spend 3 weeks at #1 on this chart. The previous best was 2 non-consecutive weeks achieved by the soundtrack to K-pop Demon Hunters. The Billboard 200 ranks albums based on overall consumption, including physical sales and streaming. With this milestone, BTS also becomes the first group in 13 years to spend 3 weeks
at number 1. And BTS's Arirang World Tour has sparked much speculation about the potential economic gains of the group's performances, given its remarkable global fan base. That being said, my colleague Park Jun-an recently had the pleasure of spending some time with 2 BTS fans here to take a look.
To create unforgettable moments, global BTS fans ARMY visited South Korea to enjoy the opening week of the group's world tour Arirang in Goyang. And when fans visit, they don't just come to Korea for the concert, but also to experience the culture. Beyond the music and merch, what we are seeing here is real economic activity. As fans travel, shop, and dine, their spending spreads across the local economy, driving consumption in Korea. From BTS-themed city tours to activities like merch shopping and local dining, these fans transformed their concert trip into a cultural and spending experience.
Once you come here for BTS, you are part of this economical impact because you fly, you buy stuff here, you buy accommodation, so everything you do that is related to them increase economy of Korea.
Hallyu Wave is a big impact for us because as we fans, we really consume and we really buy what our idols are using or endorsing. K-pop in general really attracts tourists to go here in South Korea.
Over the last 10 years, there has been a meaningful increase in the number of foreign visitors to South Korea. From just over 13 million people in 2015, the number in 2025 rose to almost 19 million, up over 43%.
Travel patterns these days are no longer centered on simple sightseeing, but rather on experiencing local culture firsthand and living like a local. For people who are big fans, there are likely to be fewer constraints on spending.
The largest ever by a K-pop act, BTS is visiting 34 cities for a total of 85 shows as part of the group's world tour, which is projected to generate at least $1 billion in direct revenue for the group's agency HYBE and have a multi-billion-dollar impact on the global economy. This is a powerful reminder of the strength of BTSnomics. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
Also here on the local front, a new monorail is seeking to offer greater public access to a former presidential vacation home in Cheongnamdae province. Our Cha Yun-kyung has a glimpse.
The monorail climbs slowly along the mountainside. As it reaches the top, the panoramic view of Daecheongo Lake and Cheongnamdae unfolds. The newly opened 330-meter monorail connects the boarding station near the main gate to Observatory Number 1. It consists of 2 linked 20-seater cars, accommodating up to 40 passengers per trip. The most significant change is the enhanced accessibility for the mobility impaired, including the disabled, the elderly, and children, which was previously a challenge due to Cheongnamdae's sloping terrain. While Observatory Number 1 is one of the most scenic spots within Cheongnamdae, limited access had long been a source of inconvenience for visitors. However, the monorail project became possible after the Ministry of Environment revised the regulations to allow limited development within water source protection areas. The Cheongnamdae Management Office now plans to begin official operations. With improved mobility added to its beautiful scenery, all eyes are on whether Cheongnamdae will solidify its position as the representative tourist landmark of Chungcheongbuk-do province. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
This is the world now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday made an appearance in southern Lebanon, standing among Israeli troops inside what his military calls a security zone on Lebanese soil. Speaking on video surrounded by soldiers in balaclavas, Netanyahu said the war is not over and his forces have more to accomplish and are actively doing it. The Trump administration has pressed Netanyahu to scale back its attacks and open negotiations, warning the strikes are threatening the fragile U.S. Iran ceasefire. Despite that pressure, Israeli strikes continued on Sunday, killing at least 35 more people, according to Lebanese authorities. Nigerian military jets on Saturday night struck a market in the country's northeast, killing more than 200 people. The strike hit Jili Market in Yobe State near the border with Borno, a region long at the center of a Boko Haram insurgency that has killed thousands and displaced millions. The Nigerian Air Force said it had been targeting Boko Haram militants in the area and has since activated a formal investigation into the civilian casualties. A local councillor told reporters that over 200 people lost their lives and many others are injured. In Haiti, at least 30 people have died in a stampede at the La Ferrière Citadel. The stampede on Saturday during an annual celebration at the 19th century UNESCO World Heritage Fortress was made worse by heavy rains. Haiti's Civil Protection Authority warned the death toll could rise, noting that students and young people were among the large crowd gathered for the event when the disaster struck. The crew of NASA's Artemis II capsule was reunited with their families in Houston, Texas on Saturday after splashdown off the coast of Southern California the day before. The 4 astronauts had spent nearly 10 days in space following the first manned trip to the vicinity of the moon in over half a century. The capsule sped through Earth's atmosphere at 32 times the speed of sound before parachuting into calm seas at 5:07 p.m. Pacific time in what was described as a bullseye landing. The mission also broke the human spaceflight distance record set by Apollo 13 in 1970, traveling 406,000 kilometers from Earth. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
Unseasonably warm conditions will continue into tomorrow, with temperatures running more than a month ahead of schedule. Despite it being April, daytime highs will rise to around 25 degrees Celsius in both Chuncheon and Seoul. But temperatures will drop sharply in the evening, falling by around 15 to 20 degrees, so you want to have a jacket handy. Looking ahead, Jeju Island will see rain from early tomorrow morning through Wednesday morning, while the southern coast may see some rain from tomorrow afternoon into the evening. Rainfall will remain on the lighter side, with Jeju Island expected to see between 5 and 30 millimeters of rain, while the southern coastal areas will see less than 5 millimeters. As for temperatures tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 12 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 9 degrees, Daejeon at 11 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 25 degrees, Chuncheon at 25 degrees as well, Gwangju at 23 degrees. Temperatures will remain above seasonal averages for the time being, bringing mild conditions, but large day-to-night temperature swings will continue.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Thank you for watching. Do join us again same time tomorrow.